All right, everybody, welcome and good evening. I am very much looking forward to tonight. It is our, I believe, 52nd session. That is crazy. That is ridiculous. We have some special guests with us tonight. Before I introduce them, though, I want to mention a few housekeeping items for those of you who are here. So first, I want to that we still do have some bottles left of our Starward single barrel port cask. Okay, we still have bottles of those left. So if you have any interest, please let us know and we will arrange for you to get them. Second, the April 11th party at Binny's. Okay, it is starting to get full. And very soon, I am going to, Eric and I are going to be telling people that they can bring guests to that. So what that means is that if you have not yet registered for the April 11th party at Binny's, you should definitely go ahead and do so. I'm fairly certain that there will be some special guests there. I'm not allowed to say who they are yet, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be happening. Before we get started, also, I want to make sure that everybody has everything with them. You should all have this, okay? You should have this very nice little tasting mat, and we are going to be going in order of what's on the tasting mat from the left to right. So that's nice and easy. And what I'd like to do right now is introduce our special guests. Casey and James. Casey, if you could please introduce yourself and your role with Laws, please.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having us. I'm Casey Rizzo. I am the brand manager at Laws Whiskey House. I've been with Laws for almost 5 years now, so I've kind of gotten my hands in everything. But I just really enjoy drinking and talking about whiskeys, which is why we're here with you all tonight. So I can't wait to dive in with you guys.
That is wonderful. I think that everybody here shares that drinking and talking about whiskeys. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. It's pretty much what got us through COVID. So it is definitely a hobby we all share. And James, if you could also introduce yourself and tell us where you're calling in from.
Yeah, my name is James Kunz. Calling in from my living room in Denver, Colorado. Just got home from work, but I'm the I was the barrel manager. Now I'm the head blender at Law's Whiskey House. So last week actually celebrated my 9th year anniversary at Law's, and I started as a distiller 9 years ago. Worked in the distillery for about 4.5 years, and it was a great experience getting familiar with all of our products that we make and the distillation process inside and out, front to back, and then moved my way over to the barrel house 4.5 years ago. So kind of half and half on each side of production. And so I look after all the aging of the barrels and barrel selection for batches and blending and single barrels and cask finishing and all that fun stuff.
That is wonderful. We're definitely going to be asking you about that as we go on.
Right.
Casey, can you tell us a little bit about the distillery, the location, how long you've been around, and really how you got to where you are right now? Because Laws is very well known at this point. A lot of people know you, especially people who are aficionados of craft whiskeys. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of Laws?
Yeah, for sure. And I actually have some images that I'll share my screen and show you guys as well. Oh, even better. It gives me an option of which screen I want to share.
And we will start drinking in a few minutes, people. But I want and anybody who wants to start, that's fine. Go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. But we're going to start talking about the whiskeys in a few minutes. But Casey had some pictures that she wants to show us.
Yeah, just a little introduction into Laws here. You guys all see my screen?
No, we do not.
Oop.
We see you.
Share screen.
There
Share.
we go. Excellent.
Awesome. Just a little introduction into Laws here. This gentleman that you see on the left, that is Al Laws. He's our owner, founder, CEO, puts the Laws in Laws Whiskey. So him and his wife, Marianne, started it all a little over 13 years ago, started distilling in Denver in 2011. He actually hails from Canada, uh, grew up in Canada, moved to New York, worked on Wall Street, and was an analyst in oil and gas.
Oh, wow.
Good job. May have described that job as soul sucking at times, his words, not mine. But paid the bills and supported his whiskey habit. He has over 600 bottles in his own personal library at home, all open, all willing to share with family and friends. He's the first person to tell you if you have a good bottle of whiskey, open it, drink it, share it, enjoy it. You know, there's always good whiskey
Mhm.
aging in a barrel somewhere, as James can tell you.
My kind of guy. My kind of guy for sure.
So he actually, him and his family moved to Colorado. He was already kind of tinkering with starting a distillery and, you know, going somewhere with this passion he had. And once him and Marianne and his family got to Colorado, they realized very quickly what a lot of us transplants to Colorado realize, that it's a great place to live, great place to raise a family, and also a great place to make and age whiskey. So that gentleman over in the corner with him, that is Bill Friel. If you recognize that name, it is because he is in the Kentucky Hall of Fame. He
Hmm.
was the master distiller for Barton's for a long, long time, over 35 years. 17, what is that? 1792 is
Hmm.
his baby. That was kind
Mm.
of his mash bill, his creation.
Nice.
When Al was looking to start a distillery, he went to Kentucky, traveled the Bourbon Trail, did a little bit of research, met Bill kind of on a whim and was able to get like this little meet and greet to pick his brain and ask him about the distilling process. Uh, Supposed to be 30 minutes. 30 minutes turned into an hour to 2 hours. At the end of this conversation, Al had convinced Bill to come out of retirement, come out to Denver and help him start his distillery. So Al has a huge passion for whiskey, which Bill recognized and wanted to really cultivate, which we appreciate. So Al
Great.
and Bill laid down the first barrel or started distilling on July 4th, 2011.
Okay.
And this middle picture is the original picture of our distillery, how we started just one small 500-gallon still, four open air fermenters,
Mhm.
um, and one cooker.
Beautiful. And I'm just curious, how many barrels a year do you now produce?
So we are producing now about 200. We have the capacity about 200 a month. So we've pulled back a little bit recently, but we started at about 75 barrel, or we were going pretty good at about 75 barrels a month. In 2019, we did some upgrades to our distillery, so now we're able to crank out 200 barrels a month.
Okay. Before we talk about this next image here, because you're actually going exactly where I want us to go here.
Oh,
Um,
perfect.
in all my research leading up to tonight, because I like to, prepare for these and I read up on the, distilleries. The word terroir came up a lot with respect to laws. And, I'd like to know, and as we get started here, and by the way, everybody, if you do want to get started, feel free and join me and cheers. We're going to get started here with the 4 grain straight bourbon. So let's all start enjoying the whiskey here. My question for you is this: the grains, okay, where are all of your grains locally sourced, or where are they coming from?
Yes, they are locally sourced. So everything we do is truly Colorado. So our wheat, rye, and barley come from the Cody family farm in Alamosa, Colorado, which is a kind of really unique area of Colorado. And they grow all these heirloom grains, truly grown for flavor. And then our corn comes from Whiskey Sisters Supply in Burlington, Colorado. And so you mentioned terroir, which we do like to talk about quite a bit, especially using, locally sourced grains. Uh, you hear that term in the wine world quite a bit, terroir. If
Hmm.
you go to a vineyard, they will talk extensively about, how these grapes and vines on this side of the valley are going to be very different from the ones grown on the other side, and produce very different wines just from exactly where they're grown, from, the soil and the earth. It was kind of long believed that grain didn't get that same expression of flavor from where it was grown,
Hmm.
mostly because we've never really explored that. Grains are not usually grown for flavor, right? They're grown for commodity. Farmers grow high yield cereal commodity grains.
Right.
We now know there's been a lot of research that terroir can be very much expressed through
Definitely.
kind of these flavor heirloom grains. So our whiskeys, we intentionally have kind of this bold grain forward flavor because we do actually like to highlight those flavors, not just of the barrel, but of the grains in the barrel as well.
Um, somebody asked a really good question in the chat here before we move on. When you started, were you also using local grains? Because obviously, when you start, it's a very different experience from when you're a mature distillery.
Yes, the idea when we started was always to use local grains, but no, at the very beginning we weren't. In fact, Al tried to get local corn and the Corn Association wouldn't even call him back. So I've heard all of these stories of the relationships built, told by both from Al's point of view, and then also from one of the Whiskey sisters, Stephanie, and one of the Cody brothers, Jason. And so it's great
So
to
there are
hear kind of
different stories about the history. That's funny.
all of the stories. But the relationship with the Cody family farm came along when very, very early on, Al just ran out of a little bit of wheat and had to run to a local brew store to get like 50 pounds of wheat. And it happened to be the wheat from the Cody family farm, who also malts all their grain as well. So they grow and malt all our grain. And he kind of tells it as opening up that bag and having such like a fantastic, unique smell to that wheat. He had to like look at it and be like, wait, where's this from? Called the number on the bag,
Right.
and it's the house phone inside the Cody family farm. And he was like, hey, you don't know me. I have a distillery in Denver. Like, can you get me 50,000 pounds?
Right.
Like, at
Well,
this
yeah,
certain
because well,
time.
small businesses, small businesses have to
Yeah.
scramble, a lot of times, when they don't when they're not a market force. Um, the water source that you use is all of the water local? Do you filter it or do you just use it as is from local streams?
Yeah, so we use Elder Springs water from Boulder, which is a local water. It's a great filtered water. James can probably even talk more
Okay.
detailed kind of on the water because we use that in the
Right. And
proofing
actually, I'm going
process.
to ask him about the proofing down stuff, so that's important
Oh,
too. Um,
perfect.
James, can you tell me what the mash bill is of this straight bourbon, the 4 grain? Because obviously the 4 grains are a very big part of the laws, really of the law's philosophy.
Yeah, certainly. So the 4 grain bourbon is one of our two flagship brands. It is the main selling product of ours. The mash bill is 60% corn, 20% wheat, 10% rye, and 10% malted barley.
Okay, so so the only malt, so it's malted rye and it's unmalted. I'm sorry, it's malted barley, but it's unmalted rye.
That's right. And of the 20% of the 20% wheat that's in the mash bill, there is a little bit of malted wheat in there as well.
Okay, got it. And I understand that you obviously you have when it comes off of the still, and you've been maturing it for a while, they're at a higher proof and then you start to proof it down. Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about your process of proofing down? And I want everybody to hear this because when I was doing my research and I was reading up on laws, um, there was one thing that I read that really fascinated me, and I want to make sure everybody hears this. So, James, from what I understand, when it comes off of the still and when you're ready to start playing with it, it's about 115 proof or so, and you want it to get down to about 95 proof. and you do it over 10 days, about 2% per day, something like that, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that process and why it takes you so long to do that proofing down? Because that is fascinating to me.
Yeah, so we do a slow proof down process for two main reasons. Um, First reason is if you take whiskey out of the barrel, say at about 115 proof or something like that. Sometimes it's a little bit higher, but we'll say 115 when we harvest the batch of bourbon. You add all the water to 2,000 gallons of whiskey to take it down to 95 proof. That's going to be several hundred gallons of water. Um, a a reaction happens in the tank. So when alcohol mixes with water, it creates an exothermic reaction. So it starts to heat up, and it might only heat up a couple degrees Celsius when you add, say, 50, 60, 100 gallons of water. If you add several hundred gallons of water to 2,000 gallons of whiskey, it's going to heat up quickly and it's going to drive off a lot of aroma. And so over the period of anywhere 3 to 5, 8 years, we've worked really hard to preserve that aroma as much as possible in the whiskey, and we want to keep that in the whiskey. So that's the main reason. Another reason is a reaction happens called saponification, and water it reacts with the fatty acids, the lipids in our whiskey or in any spirit, and it creates these soap-like flavors and aromas that once you have that in your whiskey, you can't get it out. So if you do it slowly, you can avoid that. But we've worked so hard to make it taste good and smell good, and we don't want to ruin it by making it taste soapy. So it takes a while.
We have some people who very much understand that concept and are very sensitive to the soapiness. So anything you can do to get rid of that, we very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
Is there some magic to the 95 proof in your company's philosophy? Because obviously a lot of your line is at 95 proof.
Yeah, we found that it really just balances so nicely at 95 proof. Um, the first product that we came out with was the 4 grain bourbon at 95 proof. We tried it at a whole bunch of different proofs, all the way up, 105, 110. That was a little too hot. 90 and below didn't quite stand up enough. 95 seemed to be the magic number for our products. And the idea with the 4 grain bourbon is that you can drink it neat in a glass. You can put it on ice if you want to. You can put it in a cocktail. The 4 grain bourbon is really the workhorse whiskey, and we think that it's pretty diverse, and we want it to have multiple applications. So that's the idea with that. And a lot of our products actually ended up being 95 proof because they just happen to shine best there.
Okay. Your title is Master Blender, okay, at this time. So how many different barrels go into this? So obviously I know that you're trying to get a consistency from one batch to the next, and that is both an art and a science. So how many barrels go into what we're drinking right now?
So what you're drinking right now is a 100-barrel batch. Our batch bourbon, we shoot for 100 barrels. Plus or minus, we'll sometimes add a couple extra. And those few extra barrels usually are older barrels. So we're pulling from barrels that are between 3 and 4 years old. We average actually closer to 4 years now. So that's 100 barrels. Some of those are going to be 8 to 10 years old. Kind of at the very end, we like to layer those in. Anywhere from 6 to 8 of those barrels are going to be 8 to 10 years old. And on top of that, you mentioned consistency from batch to batch. That's going to be a big challenge for anybody. Sure. making their main product, and especially on that scale. So what we do is we take about 900 gallons from a previous batch at barrel strength, and we roll that into the next batch. So we call that our rollover. You could call it a Solera. It's kind of not really a Solera, but it's just we have a separate tank. We keep it just under 900 gallons from the previous batch, and that goes back to batch number 1. So we have tiny remnants from batch number one all the way up to batch, I want to say 31 is what we're on now.
Mhm.
So, and they've grown in size. Batch number one was probably 12 barrels or something like that.
Sure.
So we've grown over time.
So it's good that you can go back to use that because that helps give you a backbone and also helps you compare, when you're putting stuff together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. That's the
So
idea.
before you were the blender, you were also the barrel manager. Okay. So how does terroir reflect in the barrels that you use?
So mostly in the aging process,
Okay.
in the environment, you could say, well, okay, to answer your question about barrels first, all of our cooperage comes from Lebanon, Missouri, out of
Okay.
Independent Stave Company. We
Hmm.
use primarily char level 3 barrels, and we have mixed in some other barrels in there from Independent Stave called Wave Stave. Those are medium plus toast with a light char on them.
Hmm.
Um, the idea being that you get a lot of nice toasty flavors in there with a little bit of char. So you could say that we're getting the terroir of the Ozarks in our American grown white oak. Um,
Nothing wrong with that.
yeah, it's
I mean,
fantastic. I mean, they make,
beautiful country. It's beautiful
yeah,
down there.
absolutely. And they make
Gorgeous.
good barrels. They're consistent, great quality, and they're able to supply us. They have been for, over 10 years now. So,
Great.
um, and then as far as aging conditions go, we're sitting at a mile high above sea level, and
Mm.
it's a dry, semi-arid climate out here. A little bit different from Chicago, probably. Uh, we get we get a
Although
lot.
we do have people on here, we do have people here from other parts of the country. We're not just a Chicago. We're primarily Chicago, but we do have people here from St. Louis and Boston and a few other places too. So it's
Okay,
not just Chicago. And by the way, while I do have the floor right now for a second, I am going to start moving on to the rye because I love rye and I just can't have a glass of rye in front of me without going into it. But if you can finish talking about the aging, and the climate, and then we'll talk about the rye.
sure. So semi-arid climate. Um, in the barrel house, we fluctuate humidity anywhere from, in the middle of winter, it tends to get really dry. The barrel house probably down into maybe 25% humidity, and in the summer up to maybe 40% humidity. In the distillery, it's even lower humidity. But all the barrels are breathing, kind of alcohol vapor in the air. It smells great. Um, and in the winter, we're probably at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and in the summer, up into the low to mid 80s. So we get fluctuations in temperature. But one of the most interesting things is barometric pressure swings. So we get fluctuations in barometric pressure several times a week, sometimes even daily.
So it's a
With
very active barrel then. So it's very active going, getting the woodsiness from the barrel is what you're saying there.
Absolutely, yeah. And with those pressure changes, the whiskey's working its way in and out of the wood really
Right.
nicely. So
Right. I know that people already are starting to make jokes between themselves about that. So and I see them laughing already. So we're just gonna move on. So this rye I love. Okay. Can you tell me the mash bill of the rye and specifically, what is this using the same grains as the other as the 4 grain bourbon? And it's just in different percentages. Is that what we're dealing with here?
yeah. So what you're tasting here is 95 proof rye. It's 100% rye in the mash bill, and it's the same rye that goes into the 4 grain bourbon. But 100% rye in the mash bill, half of that is malted rye and half it is raw rye. So
Ah, okay.
the raw rye, you're getting the nice earthy grassiness, the pepperiness. And then with the malted rye, you get a nice biscuity kind of rye bread character.
There was a few people who were asking about I don't know if I might mispronounce it, Sakale or Sakali rye, that you had. I remember
Yeah.
that several years ago. Okay, is this a different grain than you had in that rye? Casey?
It is not. So a while ago, you'll notice now that all our single variation grains really are named to pay homage to where they are made. So the San Luis Valley rye is that SLV rye. It is a varietal of rye that only grows in the San Luis Valley, so we wanted to honor that. Our wheat is our Centennial wheat for the Centennial State, and we also have 100% malt that is called Henry Road malt. And that is literally the road that runs along the barley field down
Hmm.
in the San Luis Valley where our
Do
farmers
you
grow
do you
grain.
malt your own grains?
The farmers do down there. The Cody
Okay.
family malt all our wheat, rye, and barley.
Okay.
So before that, though, when we first started out, we had a little bit different design label, and all of our singular grain whiskeys were the Latin names for those grains. So our rye was that's called rye, so it was basically rye, straight rye in Latin. And then the Centennial wheat was Triticum wheat, and
Mm.
our malt was Fortium malt. So well, that's kind of where we started. A few years later, we decided to pay more homage to where those grains were grown. So that old rye is kind of the same. It's older batches of the same rye.
Okay, so it's the
Um,
same. So it's the same because I remember that on the shelves, and so
yeah, so
but
that is
now,
what we call
okay,
our vintage labels now. So if you see it,
got
you
it,
won't see it again, grab it, but
got it, understood. So this is 100% rye. Okay, is it? I'm curious. Is this your only expression that is single grain? Okay, because obviously your others are multi-grain products.
we have the wheat on there tonight, right? Are we doing the wheat this evening?
Yeah, that's
Actually, no.
next.
Right. Actually,
Yes,
no. I
yes,
might have.
that's the one.
Actually, it's funny. I
So the
skipped
wheat.
ahead. I'm so sorry. That was my fault. I skipped ahead to the rye because I wanted to taste the rye.
No, 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 no.
No, I'm sorry.
No, the rye was second, and then the
Uh,
wheat's third.
Wait, did I
yeah, the
No,
do
you're
wheat's
the?
fine.
third.
Oh, I,
The
I did it
wheat
in the
is
right order. Okay,
bonded.
good, good. Oh no, you know what?
Yeah.
I mixed up my
Um,
bottles here. That's all. Okay, all right.
no, you're
So my
good.
glasses are in the right
But
order.
our
Okay,
our wheat, the next one up on the list, is not a wheated bourbon. That is a wheat
Hello.
whiskey,
Come here.
and it is a
What?
100% wheat grain.
okay,
Come
okay.
here.
So that's also 100%. Okay, got
This
it.
is
All right,
enough.
wonderful. All right, sorry for my confusion there. And all right, great, wonderful. All right, so let's go back to talking about this rye for a second here. So this rye, the San Luis Valley, is San Luis Valley near your distillery? I know, is your distillery located in the San Luis Valley? What can you tell us about that valley?
So we're located in Denver. The San Luis Valley is way down, let's see, down south. Um, and so it is about 6 hours away from us in Colorado. But it is a very unique area of Colorado. It is a prehistoric lake bed. It has very sandy soil. It just has very, very unique growing conditions to create
Okay,
this
okay,
very unique varietal of grain.
wonderful. And the wheat, the straight wheat whiskey, okay. So if you can tell us a little bit about this particular thing. So this one I notice is 7 years. Okay. So bonded means that it's 50%. Okay. That it's 100 proof, 50%. Is this a whiskey that you have done at younger ages, or is it only now coming out at the 7 year? Like, did you do this for like your 4 years and 5 years and 6 years? James, can you tell us that?
Yeah. So our first release of the wheat, like Casey said, was called Triticum on our vintage labels. That first release was 3 years old. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was a 95 proof release. It was pretty good. We were really happy to be releasing a 100% wheat whiskey in Colorado. We were really proud of that. But we found with more age, like many products, it just got better. And 4 years, it was better. So we decided to put out bottled and bond wheat at 50% ABV. And then we decided, well, 5 years is better than 4 years. And then we did a couple of releases of 5 year bottled and bond wheat whiskey, which were great. And now we're up to 7 years. And we're finding that the wheat is kind of a little bit mysterious. It starts out really soft and smooth and round, and then it gets a little bit fiery in your mouth, and it
Yeah.
gets,
It's chewy, it has a texture to it. It's got this chewiness that I just want to keep drinking more of it. It's like, almost like, potato chip. You can't have just one. It's like as soon as it goes down, I want to drink a little bit more of it to have the same sensation. Can you tell us, a little bit about like how many barrels go into this? Is it the same thing where you're blending a bunch of barrels together, but since it's one grain, it's not really the same process, right?
Yeah, we take a similar approach to all of our batch building, but it's a much smaller batch. So the batch that you're tasting is probably about 12 to 15 barrels, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Um, and with building any batch, I like to take the majority of the batch, being what I call the core barrels, and that could be all the way up to a 100-barrel batch. In this case, there was the core of the batch was probably 10 or so barrels that I think really represent that mash bill really well, sort of right down the middle. And then I start adding sort of the outlying barrels, something that might be a little spicier, something a little more sweet, floral, earthy, things like that. And that's where the real fun happens because I get to play around with adding different things. So that's kind of just the general process.
Right. Did as your distillery evolved, and maybe this might be more of a question for Casey, did you work with the farmers who produce these grains to, develop like your own strains or to work on particular strains that would be proprietary for you? How did you guys work together, work with those farms, Casey?
Yeah, so we don't necessarily have any that are proprietary to us, but we work very closely with them. For that SLV rye, for example, we are contracted to buy about 80% of the rye grown any year on that farm. And we did have a kind of a second distillery upgrade after our 2019 upgrade in early 2021. And I remember when we first started like gonna go up to 200 barrels. And I was actually in Chicago at an event with Jason Cody, one of the farmers. James was there too. Um, and I was talking about that to him, and I was like, "Oh yeah, our head distiller Sam." I'm like, "Sam says we're gonna rev up to 200 barrels real soon." And he was like, "200 barrels?" And he like gets out his calculator and is doing the math, and he's like, "We're gonna have to plant more rye." So we
Nice.
definitely do take a big majority of that San Luis Valley rye. But it is just a really great relationship, not only with that, but they do malt all their own grains, which is also very special to us because um, you know, many people, as far as growing grains and malting grains, 95% of distilleries in the entire country get their grains from just um, 5 farms in the entire country. So a lot of, good whiskey, bad whiskey, cheap, expensive, chances are you're tasting these kind of like commodity grains from these 5 farms, and they might not know what season or who malted them, or they might go from one farm to be stored at another farm to be malted by another place. When
Okay.
you're drinking our whiskey, it's been 2 places. It's been on the farm where it was both grown and malted, and in our distillery to be put into a glass of whiskey. So
That I
that's
love. I love that small business aspect to it of you're controlling your processes, you're doing it all really in one or two places. I love that idea because it sounds like it's still very much of a small business, as opposed to a
Yeah.
big
Oh yeah,
conglomerate. Yeah.
absolutely.
And
And with them being able to malt, they were the first kind of smaller, non like commercial malting facility in the country, actually. They actually once were a dairy farm, and they took some of their old like dairy, what are those called, James?
Dairy tanks.
Cultures,
No
dairy
tanks.
tanks, and yeah, and kind of recommission them into their first like malting tanks. So with that, we're able to kind of experiment with malting and different malt flavors and play with that. And then with the Whiskey Sisters growing our corn out in Burlington, actually we are distilling our 4-grain bourbon right now with red corn that was grown from their farm, actually this week, just to see how that goes. So we get the ability to kind of play around with what they may have in season as well, and what they might think is exciting.
Got it. A few more questions, and we're going to go into the fourth, and then we're going to open it up to the crowd for questions here. So, before we go into the last whiskey of the night, the fourth sample that you provided us, obviously you use malted barley, okay? And I think I'm going to throw this one at James. Let's talk about single malt, okay? Is this something that you are experimenting with? I don't remember seeing a single malt from you out on the shelves yet, but of course I could have missed it. Is this something that might be coming from Laws down the line?
Yeah. So as Casey mentioned, one of our labels is the Henry Road malt. So we have released malt in the past. Prior to that, under its old label, it was Hordium. And so it's a product that we've made in pretty limited releases.
Okay.
And it's followed several different mash bills. The whole idea is just playing with different types of malt. The main malt that we use is actually made for brewing beer, but it has a lot of flavor in it. So you may have heard of distiller's malt. Big large whiskey producers use distiller's malt. It doesn't really contribute much flavor at all because it's in bourbon. It's going to be such a small percentage of the mash bill, but we use up to 10% in the 4-grain bourbon, and then in our malt whiskey, 100% malt. It's really flavorful grain, and we want to preserve that flavor as much as possible. So we've tried a whole bunch of different mash bills, including both pale malt as our base, but some chocolate malt, some crystal malt, Munich malt, some peated malt, some oak smoked malt.
Oh, so you're really playing. You're having fun.
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah. That's
and
great.
it's been so much fun. So we're in both new and used cooperage. So we've actually got quite a bit aging right now that we're willing to take, 10 plus years. So keep an eye out. There's going to be more Laws malt out on the market, and we're going to call it Laws single malt.
Awesome. So I want to thank you both for also providing us with this last sample. So everybody, this last one, the 4-grain bourbon cask strength, okay, and I have the bottle right here. Casey, I understand that this just won a really big award. Am I right about that?
Yeah, you are very right about that, and we're very excited about it, and it was obviously a point of pride for us. But it did take home world's best small batch bourbon at the World Whiskey Awards this year. So there are a few categories in this, and there is Kentucky and non-Kentucky, and then world's best. So we have taken home world's best non-Kentucky bourbon before. We have taken home world's best rye under 12 years before, but we have never taken home that top category. So the Kentucky best small batch bourbon was Four Roses, and we beat a Kentucky bourbon out to take home world's best small batch bourbon.
Congratulations.
So,
and I want to warn
that is
everybody.
what is in your glass right now.
Right. And I need to warn everybody, in case you hadn't noticed, this is a much higher proof. This is 58.2 ABV, so that's 116.4 proof. So please be careful with that. James, I'm curious. So this is pretty much the same stuff as our first sample tonight, but at the higher proof, not proofed down. Am I right about that?
That's correct. And one less step in the process, actually. So as I said before, we'll take 100 to 105, 106 barrels, batch those in the tank, and then add the rolling remainder from the previous batch. But prior to adding that rollover, I'll take out enough for cask strength bottling. So it actually doesn't include the previous batch. So, and the whole idea with that is to have a little bit of variance from batch to batch intentionally. So we want it to be a little bit different from the previous cask strength batch.
I got to tell you, this is It's a high proof, but I can drink it without water. I mean, this is good stuff. I mean, I love how it warms me going down. You know, this is really, really delicious. I'm getting a lot of cinnamon. Okay, getting a lot of cinnamon from it, getting some cloves. Um, really, this is a beautiful whiskey. So, tell me again about the number of barrels that go into this. Just want to make sure we get that right.
So each of our large or each of our batch bourbon offerings has around 100 barrels. It in the last 2 years is kind of when we got up to that amount, and it varies maybe 102 barrels, 105 barrels, 106 barrels. So I couldn't tell you exactly. I could dig in my records and
No, no, that's
the
okay.
exact number for you, but
Just
close,
curious.
it's close to that, and it's somewhere in the area of about 5 to 8% of those barrels are older, right around 10 years. So we have the 3.5 to 4 year stuff making the majority of the batch, and then we layer in some of the older barrels just to bring some oak, some depth. And those barrels, they might not stand so well on their own as single barrels, but they bring a lot of spice and they really punch it up. So that's kind of the idea with those.
Yeah, I got to tell you, this is absolutely delicious. One thing that interests me also about what you're saying here is that it's unlikely that your bourbons are going to come out to market with an age statement because you're using so many different barrels that have different ages on them. And because I don't know if I've ever seen one of your bourbons with an age statement. I think there was a bonded one. There was a barrel. I've seen a bonded one from you, but for the most part, your straight bourbon never has an age statement, right?
Yeah. So
So
sorry, go ahead, Casey.
sorry. We put the currently our age statement is kind of rolled into the information on the back label
Okay.
for any of our flagships. So it says at least 3 years old because everything is at least 3 years old. And that was kind of from the beginning. When Al started, we didn't open our doors or sell anything until he had aged stuff for 3 years. So we've never released anything under 3 years and we never will. So anything you have had or ever will have from Laws has always been distilled by us. We never sourced and everything's at least 3 years old.
Got it.
So everything was always an average of 3 and had that age statement. This year, we actually just submitted the newest label because now all the batches we're building are all over 4 years. So starting
Oh, okay.
soon with a batch, we will be removing the age statement completely.
Wonderful. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to open it up for questions. Okay. So everybody knows how we do this. You have the reactions button. You raise your hand. And before we get to those questions, I want to ask Eric. Eric, while people are getting in the queue, raising their hands, Eric, what questions do you have for Casey and or James?
One question is, especially since you're using local farms to grow your grains, how much are you seeing differences in flavor year over year with the grain?
That's a good question. I think it's most noticeable from year to year with the rye, and I can think of one year in particular. Well, I don't remember the year exactly, but a group of barrels that really stand out. Um, that particular grain harvest made some rye that was really extra earthy, and I couldn't tell you why, but if you go back and look in barrels, if you were in the barrel house, you could look barrels maybe between 400 and 500 and go taste any of those barrels. They are very, very earthy. And even a handful of them we called Miracle Grow barrels because they tasted kind of like potting soil. That's kind of an exaggeration, but and that
Love it.
stuff gets blended out into future batches and stuff. I would never put out a batch that tasted like potting soil, but the earthiness, it's just kind of a good example of something like that.
It's all in the branding. I mean, you
Yeah,
could.
yeah, absolutely. But prior to that, if you go back, gosh, I want to say early 2016, we had an incident that we call Rygate, and we had that year's harvest, or that grain would have come from the fall of 2015 harvest, and the rye that came off the field, we had no idea, but it was particularly high in oil content. And none of us knew that if your grain has too much oil in it, it'll actually coat the inside of the still. And you're probably familiar.
Oh no. Oh
Yeah,
no.
it gets messy. Rye is already a pretty messy grain. It's very sticky. It's full of protein. It makes very dense bread if you're baking rye bread. But it's quite a chore to even clean out the fermenters in the still. But that particular year, there was so much oil in the rye grain in the mash that it coated the inside of the still. And most stills are made of copper. Copper reacts with sulfur, pulls out sulfur from the distillate, um, so that it doesn't make it into the final spirit. Well, if your copper is coated with oil, it can't do that job of scrubbing sulfur. And so we had this distillate, about 100 barrels worth, that was extra sulfury. And we had to
Oh,
go back and distill them a
Oh,
third time. And it was kind of a happy accident. We all learned a lot. We changed our cleaning protocols. It helped us. It helped improve our process for the better. And we had about 100 barrels of triple distilled rye that ended up being delicious. So it
love
all
it.
ended up being okay, but
And
Yeah.
not without
James,
some
some
headaches.
Rygate barrels went into something recently, right? Weren't some Rygate barrels blended into something
Yeah,
recently?
Cornerstone. So
Oh,
Origins is our annual kind of super premium release that we've done over the last 4 years. And Origins, last year, Origins release was a rye batch. And that was an integration of 4 year on the youngest side up to 11 year on the oldest side, and some barrels in between, 6, 7, 8 years. So a vertical integration of different ages. And some of those were Rygate barrels, and they actually ended up being really good.
Beautiful. All right, I want to
that's
go
awesome.
to the question. Actually, Eric, do you have any other questions, or can we go on to Josh Eisenberg?
No, we can go on. Thank
All
you
right,
for answering the question.
great. Josh, please unmute yourself.
Awesome. Thanks. This has been fantastic. Particularly love the story around your relationship with the farms and the varietals of the grains that you use. I was curious. I know obviously again we talked a little bit about ramp up is always a challenge, right? Once you identify these farms, what were they doing with these grains before laws, or did you, as part of the conversation, again, get them to grow things for you that they weren't growing before? I'm just always curious about the intersection between, obviously, that Colorado, your area, has a huge craft beer industry, right? Using all kinds of interesting things. So just can you tell us more about that story about the grains and the farms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Colorado Malting Company, prior to us working with them, I couldn't give you a number, but I would guess that they were probably malting only a couple tons a month at most. They really specialized in um, not only their base malt, pale malt, and pilsner malt, but also roasted stuff like chocolate malt and crystal malt and things like that. But yeah, they were really relying on mostly the local Colorado beer industry, prior to us getting involved in ordering, tens of tons at a time, which was, I think, for them kind of a struggle at first to ramp up production, but they had extra people on site that could help out. They come from huge families, so they have a lot of people around that can help move things along, and not only drive the tractors and harvest everything, but also malt on a daily basis. So, and then probably, as Casey said earlier, the biggest quantity of grain, or the biggest product that we buy from them, is raw rye. The malted products are certainly a big part of what they make for us, but raw rye is, I mean, they dedicate a whole, probably half a crop circle to that. I want to say a circle is like 64 acres or something like that. I could be wrong, but yeah. And then the Whiskey Sisters, they're a brokerage. They work with local farmers in their area, and they set up to buy grains just all over their area, specifically for the distilling industry. And it's all raw, none of it is malted.
Very cool. And the rye itself, were they selling to bakers, or what were they doing with that?
That's a great question. As I understand it, the rye used to be planted as a cover crop in the San Luis Valley. It was brought over by European settlers. A lot of Germans and Czechs settled the valley, as well as Spanish people, and so nobody actually knows where the rye came from originally, but it's sort of over the generations crossbred, various different varieties of rye crossbred with one another to create this unique strain.
Yeah, it's super unique. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
delicious. Thank you, Josh. Next we have Paul Mango Foam Barrett. Please unmute.
So hi, I'm Paul. Not mango foam. It's just Eric thinks he has a sense of humor, so we'll go with it. No. All right, in all seriousness, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how elevation impacts your whiskey maturation and the potential impact to the angel share and distillate loss.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we have these pressure swings that happen, pretty frequently, that work the whiskey in and out of the wood. I like to compare a whiskey barrel to a single-celled organism, and the wood itself is almost like the cell membrane. The inside of the cell or the inside of the barrel wants to reach equilibrium with the outside. And so it's a fairly dry climate here. So we actually lose more water to evaporation in the angel share than we do alcohol. So a typical barrel after 3 to 4 years will yield probably 80% of what originally went into it. So it'll start out at 50 to 53 gallons. And when we harvest it, it's around 40 gallons. So, but our average entry proof is 110, and it'll climb up to about 115 to 118. So it's proofing up over time. Now, if you take that same barrel and you go to Scotland or Cognac, and age it at sea level in a really cool, humid environment, you're going to have the opposite. So your single cell organism, if you want to call it that, is trying to reach equilibrium with the outside humid environment, and it's going to lose more water to evaporation. I'm sorry, more alcohol to evaporation than water, and it's going to proof down over time. So you might start with a 110 proof barrel and end up with something like 100 proof after 3, 4, 5 years. So does that answer your question?
Paul, are you there? Did we lose Paul?
Yeah, I just
think the phone
remuted, so I
fell.
nodded my head and gave a thumbs up because I'm trying to be quiet these days.
That's okay. You asked a question. You're allowed to stay unmuted and interact. It's all good.
Thanks, Paul.
Do you have any follow-up question, Paul?
I'm
Okay.
being good and sticking to one question at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, fine. We're gonna go on to Ariel Eisenberg, who doesn't know how to be good. Ariel, please unmute yourself. Thank you.
I was going to do one question, but if Paul's going to give up his second one. So I noticed on the info that you sent out, the 4-grain is advertised as open air sour mash, and I'm not familiar with distilleries using open air sour mash as a descriptor. I'm quite frankly not as familiar with the process. Does the open air mash add yeasts? What does that do for the distillate?
Yeah. So actually quite a bit. I would say the majority of traditional American whiskey is open air sour mash fermentation. In the open air fermentation process, we're adding distiller's yeast when the mash is cooked. So if you imagine sort of a loose oatmeal or a kind of a watery, not watery, but like a liquidy kind of oatmeal, that's the mash. It's pretty sweet. That's got a lot of fermentable sugar in it. It's sitting at about 18% fermentable sugar in the mash. So we had distiller's yeast. It's Saccharomyces cerevisiae. That's the same ale yeast that a brewer would use to make a pale ale or something like that. It's actually the same species of yeast that a baker would use to bake bread. Just this is selectively bred to be extra tolerant of high alcohol and high temperature. So it works really well. And we could even ferment it warmer and make more alcohol than we do. It yields about 10% ABV in the mash, but not only that, so we add the distiller's yeast, but also with open air fermentation, we're sort of inviting in the local microflora, if you will. So wild yeast and wild bacteria that are floating around in the air settle into the mash and start to drive the pH down really quickly. So after even 24 hours of a 3-day, 4-day fermentation, it's going to start to sour noticeably. But that adds a lot of character. So in fermentation and distillation and in barrel maturation, you have a process called esterification, and esters are super important in creating these really nice fruit flavors and aroma that you get in whiskey and beer and other distillates. But half of an ester is acid. So something like acetic acid with ethanol makes an ester, or that'd be ethyl acetate. But various esters kind of have maybe sort of like peach aroma or apple aroma or even floral aromas. So it's super important. And that's kind of the main reason for doing open air. And besides that, we'll actually take a portion of the previous mash and use that to acidify the water, what we call strike water, when we're cooking the next batch in the mash cooker. So adding a little bit of acidity to the strike water actually helps the process of breaking down starches into sugar. So
Awesome. Thank you. My one other question. Thank you, Gil. I appreciate your patience.
My pleasure.
Do you ever reuse your own bourbon barrels for any other kind of expressions?
good question. Yes, but it's very limited. So what's a good example? So as I mentioned before, our malt whiskey, we have probably about half of our malt barrels. We have over 100 malt barrels laid down right now, aging, which percentage wise is actually not very much of what we do, but about half of those are used bourbon and rye barrels. Independent Stave makes great barrels. It's white oak. It's full of flavor. Even after using them for 6-8 years, maybe, there's still a lot of flavor left in there. I like to compare a barrel to using a tea bag. You know, you steep it once and you get a lot of strong flavor quickly. You steep it again, you're going to get more flavor. It's going to be a little weaker, maybe not weak. It's just different flavor. It takes longer to extract those flavors. And some distillers use them 3 times or 4 times. You know, there's a reason why Scotch distillers use American bourbon barrels. It's because there's still plenty of flavor left in them, and they're very high quality wood. So we've done that with a handful. Every one of our mash bills, the bourbon, the rye, wheat, malt, we all have at least maybe 10 or 20 of those, the distillate going into used bourbon barrels and rye barrels. And the idea is just to kind of experiment and just kind of play around with those expressions. So, but we can't call those straight bourbon, straight rye. We'll call them bourbon mash or rye mash. And they've been pretty limited releases that, as far as I know, we only sell in our tasting room maybe once a year or even less than that.
That was a great
Awesome.
question.
Thanks so much.
Great,
Appreciate it.
yeah, that was a great question, Ariel. Really wonderful. Lynn, if you can please unmute yourself.
I have done so. First of all, thank you for the way you go from when you downproof. As one of the people who is notoriously sensitive to products of saponification and has had to give away otherwise excellent whiskey because somebody wasn't as careful as you guys are, thank you. That's not my question, but it is a vote of appreciation.
Thank you.
Can't tell you. Gil has been the recipient of some very fine things that I couldn't drink because they were saponified. Anyway.
I am more than willing to continue to be the recipient of things that you don't necessarily
I
like.
can't
Lynn.
drink. Yes. Anyway, I am loving the rye, and I love this San Luis Valley straight rye. I am sitting here with a bottle that I decided to open in honor of tonight.
So my speaker.
But let me finish my question, which is batch 2 San Luis Valley straight rye, bottled in bond. It's 50% ABV, and it is without a doubt one of the most mellow, glorious things I've ever had. What can you tell me about batch 2? Because I don't have any information on it. This question's mostly for James, but we'll see.
What can I tell you about batch 2? I can tell you that we probably bottled that 2 years ago, I want to say. I couldn't tell you how many barrels went into that batch, likely between 10 and 20 barrels. We keep our bonded releases pretty small. And other than that, I don't have any details for you. I'm sorry.
It's just absolutely one of the smoothest, loveliest, fragrant, tasty whiskeys I think I've ever had. Glory.
You know, I love all my children equally, but the rye tends to be one of my favorite, and that 7-year bonded rye is absolutely one of my absolute favorite for sure. I'm trying to see if I have any information on batch 2.
Well, you know what? You can also email that to me later, Casey, if you find it. And I'll make sure that Lynn gets it. Okay. Anything that you find.
And Lynn, you're going to send out samples to everyone, right?
Hold on. We are not in the after party yet. Eisenberg, you're going to get yourself muted. Okay, Lynn, do you have any other questions before we go on to William Myers? Okay, William Myers, please unmute.
Yes. Hey, so couple of questions, and feel free to pick and choose. I was just looking online. I was curious about the honey barrels, curious about the Cornerstone rye, looks like 5 to 10-year-old, and then also I was wondering if you rinse your barrels.
Okay, so in that order, the honey barrels, it's an annual release that we do. There's a local honey maker. I want to say they're in Berthoud, Colorado, so that's north of Denver, about an hour away. They have it's an apiary, so they have beehives on site. They bring them out to alfalfa fields locally, wildflower fields, and then harvest the honey. They make a product that's whiskey barrel aged honey. So we kind of just swap barrels with them. So we'll send them barrels. They don't have much space in their facility, so they can only take 2 at a time. And they'll fill up the 53-gallon honey barrels or bourbon barrels with honey. And I make sure that they're extra juicy. So there's still quite a bit of bourbon left in there. And they're always fresh. So they age their honey for about 6 months and then empty those out.
That sounds so delicious. That sounds so tasty.
The honey is really good, and it's really good on toast with butter. That's just how I like it. But
is that only available at the distillery? Unfortunately, I assume.
You know, as far as I know,
It's at Penny's.
That's the only place that I've seen it, but you might be
the honey is sold out at the moment. And we probably, I don't know, what do you think? We'll do a 2025 release maybe of the honey?
Yeah.
Another one?
There's a possibility that we might do one this fall. We're trying to build up a bigger stock of barrels before we do another release. So we've got, I want to say 10 or 12 right now. We need to actually lay down more and keep it going for a little bit longer. So I finish bourbon for at least a year in those barrels. If I can get a little bit more time out of them, I will. But I'd like to build it up to maybe 16 or 20 barrels. So
The
Got it.
honey quickly became a fan favorite. So our 2023 release was the first time we got it out of the tasting room and it was available online.
Oh, okay.
And few markets did get a few cases, and I think Chicago may have even got a few cases back then, to possibly Benny's. But next time it comes out, it will be available at least online to ship.
I will tell you that if you wanted to arrange to have a few cases sent to Chicago, we could probably take those off of your hand, Casey. Just letting you know, you have my email. Okay. Now I got a private message here. Michael Nolan is having some technical issues, so he had to move to his phone, but he has a question. Michael, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question, that would be great.
Thank you, thank you. So
What's the
can
honey
you talk a little
bomb
bit
at?
about your single malt? I know that you've done some in the past.
So I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I said, can you talk a little bit about your single malt? I know you've done some in the past. Are you doing more in the future?
Yeah, yep. It's been pretty limited releases in the past. We've got a little over 100 barrels aging right now. We're just playing around with different blends. We've in our malt mash bill, we've actually done quite a few variations on that with different types of malt, and so we're just playing around with blending of different malt mash bills and between new and used cooperage and finishes and things like that. So we're working on it. It might be another couple of years before we actually come out with something.
I understand. Then on a side note, we have a family celebration in the fall in Denver, and I was tasked with making a list of distilleries and breweries, and distilleries are easy, but what's your favorite brewery?
My favorite, and it's kind of one of the favorites of the Laws staff, is called Ratio Brewing. They have 2 locations in Denver. Really good beer, all different styles. What else? If you go down to the Rhino area north of downtown, there are a ton of breweries. Our
Yeah,
mutual friend is
actually,
down-
we happened to visit that. I didn't have time to enjoy a beer, but yeah, we actually visited that location in Rhino. So
Oh,
thank you
cool.
very much.
Of course, yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. There was one other question that came up that somebody sent me in the chat. I forget who asked me the question. It's a technical question, and then we'll wrap it up and go and adjourn to the after party. How long is your fermentation process?
So fermentation we used to do a 4-day fermentation in order to get as much alcohol as we could out of our mash. We actually found that we could shorten that to 3 days and still get the same yield. We haven't been able to tell any sort of loss in flavor or spirit quality. So we shortened it to 3 days. On occasion, if the distillery is down or some, if our boiler is down and we can't run the still or something like that, we can push fermentation up to 4 or 5 days if we need to. But we'll actually, if that's the case, we'll actually turn down the temperature on the fermenters and cool them down just to run it a little bit more slowly.
Got it. Wonderful. All right. So what I want to do right now is this. I just want to tell you guys that I'm so glad you were able to be here tonight. I'm so glad that I went to Benny's Craft Whiskey show back in the fall, and that I went to your table and talked to your people, because we've been doing this now since COVID started, and I've loved your stuff for so many years, and I kept meaning to contact you guys to have you on. And sometimes you just need to see somebody in person to make that actually happen. And so I'm glad that the person I met there introduced me to Casey, and that Eric and I then, we had a Zoom call with Casey, and she arranged for both for all of us to get this whiskey. So that was wonderful, Casey, and to bring you on tonight, James. So what I want everybody to do right now, if you are so inclined, is to pour yourselves another dram. I am finishing off this rye. It's amazing. I'm going to be buying a bottle very, very soon because I need more of this. It's incredible. But if everybody could please unmute and join me in saying a very hearty cheers and thank you to our special guests, Casey and James.
McCollum, thank you.
Thank you
Fine,
to our
cheers.
friends Casey and
Thank you.
James.
Awesome.
This was wonderful. Casey, I'm going to go to you first, and we'll go to James to finish it off. Casey, do you have any final words for us before we go to James for the final word?
Right.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone. We always appreciate being able to hang out with you guys. I'm gonna put my email in the chat as well. It's super easy to remember. It's just Casey at Law's Whiskey House. Please, if you have any questions that you think of, feel free to reach out to me. If you're in Denver, please stop by and come on our tour and see our distillery. We're in the process of building a brand new kind of tasting room and guest experience right next to our current distillery.
Wonderful.
That is 85% done, so I'm told at the moment, and we may have a tasting room opening date any day now, hopefully sometime at the end of
well,
May.
let us know. We'll help you publicize it. Let us know. That's great.
So yeah, please come visit us, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional whiskey questions.
Thank you. James, do you have any final words for us before we adjourn?
Oh, great responsibility with the final words here. I'd just like to say thank you so much for having us. It's always a privilege to sit down with whiskey clubs, groups of people who like to drink our stuff or drink any whiskey and just chat about it. We really appreciate you giving us a chance, so thank you. And one final thing, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but
Sure.
I like Malort.
Beautiful.
wait.
I
Do
don't
you
have
like-
anything to add. That is beautiful. That is a great way to end.
I
Everybody.
have to add one question.
Oh, Paul, you're killing me.
Mango Foma.
But James, no. Do you like coconut fat washed Malort?
Oh,
I've never tried it, but I might have to.
oh my
Next time
God.
you're in Chicago.
Okay.
Paul, you're just killing me here. All right, everybody, this was a wonderful session. Sorry I got confused a little bit before. This was awesome. Casey, James, you totally rock. Eric, as always, thank you for setting everything up. Everybody, including Casey and James, please hang around for a minute. Eric, thank you again, and please turn off the recording.